Right, now we have just gone through the bulk of the material. We've got this and one more episode to go. Here is where the pieces really come together. Now, the technical pieces came together in the episode before where we looked at the DAW, where you actually sequence things, you put stuff in here and you're making your synthesizers make noises and pushing that through the effects units and basically making the tune. Mixing is where you take that raw set of ideas and then polish it up into the piece. It is not where you make the piece. So many people make the mistake of thinking you can do garbage, and then through mixing, and even worse, mastering, that you will somehow turn your idealess noise into something amazing. No DAW, no set of plugins, no anything will ever do that for you. So we want to take that off the table, because then we have a chance of actually understanding what we're doing. This is not a lesson on mixing. I've done plenty of those, and I'm happy to do plenty again, particularly one-on-one. Hire me for that kind of stuff. This is just looking through Reason's features, or some of them, and how they work really well for what they're designed to do, and some of the unique features that make Reason such a wonder to work in if you're the right match for the software. The very first thing that I will do before mixing anything, whether it's my project or a client's project, is I will organize the work. Obviously, if it's my project, if I've been working on it, then as I'm going, I will have arranged things in nice colors, as I've explained early on in episode 3, I think it was, the rack and setting things up, being organized. Obviously, if it's my work, it makes it easy for me to know what's going on. When it's somebody else's work, I have to transition their thought processes, their ideas into something that I can work with. It's not for me to chase their ideas, but I need to understand what their ideas are and also have myself so that I can apply my own ideas. Because if somebody's come to me, they want the Benedict thing in their mix. If they've come to me and they don't want the Benedict thing in their mix, it's a little like going to a Slayer concert when you had Phil Collins and Celine Dion in mind. It's just a bad plan for your night out. So we must be organised. The organising has already happened here. Everything is neat and tidy. We've got our project, which is very short and will become annoying quickly. But as I said, this isn't about entertainment. This is about learning. So we've got this, which is not mixed, but it's the kind of thing that will come across when somebody is composing. Too much mixing as composing can be problematic. I do a little. It is sometimes hard to compose well when you haven't got a good natural balance. I won't pretend this is a good natural balance because I just went across and zeroed everything. If you are composing and you haven't got your drums and bass in a nice natural balance, which does not mean 47 layers of distortion and compression, then you're going to find it hard because you can't feel how they work together. So find the natural balance as you're working, but then you move to a mixing stage. And also, as we discussed in the last episode, you really want to make sure that your music grooves well. Yes, ideally that's done in the composing and is already there, but this is a very easy way of showing there is a big difference here. Let's turn this on. Off. Hopefully you notice that the material suddenly becomes a lot tighter and has a more definite groove to it. Whether you think it's a good or bad groove is irrelevant, but we've used grooving features. In this case, it's Reason's Groove device, which I went over in the last episode, but the real reminder there is that when composing, make sure you use velocity. Obviously, I didn't use an awful lot here, but that was in part because I knew I was going to groovify this to show you. So once we've got our workspace well set up, it's going to be so much easier. If you work in a mess, it will always be hard. The very first thing that I will do is send reverb. Now again, go back to video number 3. Send reverb works from the sends, and we send off some of the signal to a piece of gear elsewhere. That piece of gear elsewhere is here in the rack, and being nice and organized, I make sure they're here. So I have a reverb that I prepared earlier with some post-processing, and it goes a little like this. This is just listening to that reverb. There's plenty of it. So we might get a sense of done. All my balance decisions are going to be wrong because I'm in headphones, especially for this kind of thing. Reverb must match the piece. It cannot be a top-down, that's an Ullin reverb, so I'm going to use that. You got to look at the piece and go, okay, how does this fit? To me, I can't mix without knowing what the room is. So I'm going to create the room space that I'm working in first. So that is a send and return. That's done. Let's look at the channel. Now, Reason really has a great feature in its SSL styled. It's not SSL, it has no sound of its own, but it's styled around the famous SSL mixer from early, mid, late 80s. The SSL console became really the definition of what a great mixing console was like ergonomically. And it's very unusual for a DAW to actually have what people are buying VST for this, which I always think is just so crazy. So we'll work through the stages. The first one that we've got is this input. We're just going to work with drums because it's easy for the moment. Now you obviously, as you see, can open and close different sections. It is pretty darn big, and if you've ever worked with a mixing console, they are pretty damn big. So we start with an input gain. There is no right level for this to be. You will hear people talking about, you've got to follow this. Bullshit. There are videos where Andrew Sheps talks about gain staging, and the way he talks about it is very, very sensible. In other words, you don't do it just because. You do it simply because, well, what does this need to be for the next stage in the process? And before you go, but the next stage of the process requires this magic number. It's like, if that makes you happy, use that magic number. Roughly minus 12 or 0 VU is going to be a pretty reasonable practical number. If your signal is coming in low, as is happening here, then you can say, look, I'm going to push that up a bit. Okay, cool. That's all it's for, to give you a rough sense. Now, when I'm working, I will do a lot of my broad mix level stuff up here. I get mixes sent over and they're like this, and oh, that's there, and this is down here, and it's like, you know, you've got so little play here. So what you can do is, if you're finding yourself doing this kind of stuff, then you're better off actually going, why don't I adjust this here? If I've got this set at minus 15, why don't I go at minus 15 here and put that back up to 0? That's common sense. That's being organized. So we can push this level till we get the right kind of level. We've then got various bits of how we organize which way the signal flows. For the moment, a signal comes into the desk, it goes through the EQ, it goes out to the insert box, whatever's there, and then down to the faders. You can rearrange that here. So you can go into the desk straight to the inserts, which essentially makes it the same way that I work, and I showed you this in video 3, where it's instrument, goes into pedal, goes into back of desk. So that's making that kind of lineup. So the inserts and then the dynamic processing, which we're going to look at in a moment, comes after whatever your inserts are. So that's essentially the way that I work, except I don't do it that way. I leave my things out of the box, so it's easy to see. And then you can put the EQ before the dynamics. There are two schools of thought on EQ v dynamics. Some people say, well, you get the tone that you want, then you apply your dynamics. I'm not such a fan of that. There's logic to that. Like, you can say, well, okay, I want this to be, the base of this to be driving the dynamics processor more, so I'll boost that first. But if that was the case, I'd boost that before it hit the desk. But nonetheless, there is that option. Personally, I'm far more of a dynamics to just control the dynamics, and then I leave this EQ, the one that's on the SSL, and we'll discuss this later, I leave that for final tonal adjustment. Because your dynamics is going to change your tone, the more you use the dynamics, the more aggressive you are with it, the more it will change your tone. It's prone to making things a little dull because it crushes the little tiny fairy wing flitteries up the top of the frequency range far more than it does the big stonking trolls down the bottom. So therefore you can end up with a dull signal if you're not careful. So I tend not to vary this much, with the exception of where it is an audio track, and then I put the insert first, because if I'm using something like Drive, then I can be adding noise on the bottom end or something like that, and so I'll want that to be cleaned up by certain EQ features. So that's the only time I use that insert first on audio tracks, because there is no in between the audio and because it's integrated kind of into the desk. So for MIDI tracks, it'll look like this. For audio tracks, it'll look like this. We then go to the dynamics section. Dynamics section is really the built-in compressor and what have you that you need. I don't think of these as character devices so much as just control devices. So if we're running our signal, we can use this compressor that's built in just to even the levels. Hear how it's a bit thump-thumpy? We don't notice a lot of difference here, but if we look at our levels, they've dropped back a little bit. They have tightened a little bit. There's a little less of the muddy banging a tub, a little less. There are two modes for this compressor. There is RMS, which is VU or root mean square or an average based upon how we hear. I'll show a video that I made for Hertz all on that. Go watch that. If you don't understand levels, none of this is going to make proper sense. There's also a peak mode, which is your faster. It will tend to do more compressing. And then there's a fast mode, which means it's got a much faster attack. While it's tempting to say, well, I'm going to use peak mode and fast mode and set my threshold as low as possible and ratio as high as possible, it's not necessarily the smartest thing you can be doing. If you're just looking to control peak dynamics, you may want a fairly high ratio, but you're probably looking just to hear how that kind of squashes the signal. And while you think, oh yes, I can just turn it up later, it just sounds nasty and squashed. So my advice is only use these if you've really got something seriously problematic. To be very honest, I do not use these. I don't mind the RMS detector. I think it's actually quite nice because it's really quite transparent. So it's nice. I just tend not to work this way. You then have a gate. So that's this one here. That's compressor. That's gate here. Yes, you can wire in a sidechain signal. That's all I'm going to say on that. Now your gate you can set to the total range as to how much it's going to chop down. The threshold, in this case the higher the threshold, the sooner the gate will start to, well, gate. And you can use this for creative effect. Again, here we got a much tighter signal. So while you can use this to get rid of hiss, you can also use it to tighten a signal. So a combination of the pair of them you can hear here how we're starting to trigger too fast. You can set a hold amount. you want the attack to be faster, too fast an attack, you can hear this kind of sound. So you don't necessarily want it, which is why it doesn't default on. Again, I don't really use these, not because they're bad, they just don't really fit my workflow. They are rather cool. The EQ is here. You've got a low pass and a high pass band. Nice natural filtering. They're not really designed for what you call creative stuff, but they do let you tidy things up a little bit. So they are very good for that. Then we've got the SSLs, quite famous for these. People pay a pile of money to get this kind of thing. You've got some nice EQs. Now there you've got a high frequency, so this is your boost. Oh, better turn it on. The frequency at which it's boosting. Lovely. They're a nice sounding EQ. Natural. These were not designed for really aggressive work as a rule. It's not that they're going to sound bad or anything, but it's just not the design. We'll discuss that later. So you've got your high shelf, which you can turn into a bell. So it's versatile in that sense. I don't use a high frequency bell that often, but it is there. You've then got these mid bands, which are by nature fairly broad. Set your frequency, sweep them, and then change the width. They're nice. Again, these are designed for mixing, not for setting up initial sounds. They're not for sound design, and I see people tying these up in sound design. There's then a second mode. So the first mode's very broad. The second mode is what you'd call a surgical. So it's the tighter bands, which you can make very pointy. Or you can broaden it back out again. There are two of those. They work exactly the same as each other. And then you've got a low frequency as well. Turn this back on. Watch this guy, because obviously he can sound pretty thuddy. But it does have this nice bell mode. So you can pick where you want to punch there. And especially if you tie that in with your high pass filter, we can get a nice tight kind of sound. If we bring our dynamics back in, which are probably overdone, there's no general bypass of the whole mixing desk, and while I can see a certain point at which somebody might say, but it's just not the way the world works. I know it works on your plugin, but it doesn't really make sense. If that's the case, then use a different method. Use the insert method. We've got the inserts. Now, inserts confuse people a little bit. You saw the send, where we take a bit of the signal and we send it off to somewhere else, and we bring it back. Inserts are like that, only we take the whole signal and we route it out to some devices. Big studios had, even small studios had, a rack or 17 of gear. A lot of the time it was processing gear, so there was some EQs, but a lot of it was compressor-y type stuff, but you'd also have delays and echoes and stuff like that. But it was nowhere near as hands-on. Often it was across the room. There might be a couple of bits that were in reach of the engineer, you know, one over here, and perhaps a couple of things like your reverb and delay up on the console, unless you had one of those lexicon type units sitting actually in the console. You just didn't interact with devices as much as you do now. So this idea of having like 50 million windows of plugins with knobs and shit all over them, it's a very, very modern idea. but this is where it is in your insert box. So if we flip over to the rack, remember I showed you there was this box here. So if something goes in here, one of these say, then this is in our insert. This is our send, in which case if it's a send, you'll see that dry is down at 0, wet is up at 100%. Here I would have this like this, so that my drums are now getting echo. And back into the mixing desk, I can bypass that. So where I talked about, well, what if you want to bypass all of these things? Then yes, you can actually do that if you put all your bits and pieces inside your insert box. And this is a great thing about Reason. It allows you to decide how you want your workflow to be. Every DAW tells you they do that, but most of them lock you straight into the Excel spreadsheet approach, the Pro Tools approach. And that's okay if that's what you dig. But if you don't dig that, if it doesn't flow naturally for you, then it's a bit annoying, shall we say. This gives you alternates, which if you don't understand them can seem like, and it's like, just go with what you understand until you understand, oh, that actually would work nicer for me. So you can bypass this mixing console thing entirely, really, and either put all your effects in here, but as you see, I'm prone to putting them under here, which means they hit the top of the desk. And then I don't use the insert boxes at all, unless it's an audio track. Then you have to. But you can then bypass everything that's in here. And as you see, it gives you a nice button you can press to bring that up. So you can say, I'm seeing my mixing console and I can see this effect unit, which was probably across the room in the real world. That is really, really nice. So the insert thing, it's important to understand it, because if you're working with audio, like a lot of people are, then yes, that's where your bits and pieces are. I will personally leave them open, because if you start shutting them down, then you can no longer see that they're there. There's no way of seeing as such here that there's something inside that. Maybe you could put an indicator, but I'm as happy not to have the indicator, because then it just becomes fussy and messy. I know other DAWs will do that. They'll go, look, we've given you an indicator. And it's just like, that's more shit, sir. Why are we just throwing garbage on the ground? It just makes it messy. Different people are going to have different opinions. That is my opinion on that. And remember, you can choose where the inserts sit. Like here, insert dynamic EQ. If I've got a scream sitting in here, there, this is going to sound fabulous. If I bring up this, which we'll talk about later, you see that we start to, we start to get more ick happening up top, in which case we'll get rid of it. But if we're this way around, see how it's still there. So then EQing becomes what you hear. Important to understand that. So if you're not getting the result that you want, then just look at your routing situation. And then, of course, our fader. You've got your fader. Woohoo! And again, as I said, you want to aim to have your level as it comes in at a useful level when your fader is set at 0. I'll get to the end of a mix and have all my faders sitting at 0. There is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you haven't done your mixery job, because you can have all of your levels set here or at your devices sort of here. If necessary, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you inserting some kind of gain device, gain tool. There we go. We can put this in here. So see how I've got like plus 6 dB. I can say I want to add my 6 dB here. If I go, oh look, that's now just a little too loud, I can do it here. So I can do all my mixing before I even hit the faders. The faders are not your main mixing point. I know it seems that way, but they don't have to be. And if you rely on them too much, you end up with problems. For me, the fader is literally for fading. So if I want those drums to fade in and out, and there's no better place to do it, note this, and if there is no better place to do it, then I will automate that fade here. So you see I've now got a track. It's not on the MIDI track, it's on the mixer desk track, and that does confuse some people, but it makes perfect sense, because remember, the mixing desk is a very separate device from the drum machine. The drum machine has its controls, the mixing desk has its controls, and while a lot of DAWs have rolled that into one, and it seems nice, you do create some limits. So anyway, we could say, okay, I want to have a fade out, so I can shift click here. That sets my default value, which is 734. I know it's so I can now go that's my major use for faders. If I want to get rid of that, I can get rid of this entirely, delete the automation lane, I can delete the content, I can mute the content, in which case this just goes right back where it was before, which is really nice. So with mute mode, you can flick in and out. Yay! Or I can right click here and clear automation. Just bear in mind that that's going to go to wherever it currently is. And I can delete the tracks. Just make sure there's a difference between deleting the track and deleting the track and device. If I delete the track and device, no more drum machine, no more MIDI. Sucky thing to do, delete tracks, just gets rid of the track. We've then got a few other features in here as well. We can pan it. There are a few different ways that pan can be made to work. The new gain tool gives you a couple of different options or ways of approaching that. This is a balance control. It's not the same as a literal pan. A literal pan, if we had a monophonic source, would work the way you think. It's going to say, I'm taking all this signal, I'm just moving it over there and over there. But where we've got a stereo signal, you'll hear that this is stereo because I've got hats over on the one side. Then this will move the whole thing across. So it just changes your balance, but you hear that those hi-hats don't really disappear. So if you have looked at some very old mixing consoles, you'll see they don't have a pan knob. They've got a pair of knobs, which you do this with. You turn them both to one side and back to the other, or what have you, because they then allows you to set your stereo width, which is what this guy is for. I can collapse to mono. Yeah, that hi-hat just goes exactly where I put it. Here, how that doesn't make any difference, because what this is doing is it's actually taking that pair of knobs, turning one over, turning the other over. You're not losing stuff off the edge, as I used to believe, as somebody actually told me. I just took what they told me. It's just going, yeah, I'm going to there, and that's it. So your width control is incredibly useful in a mix. If I get into a mix and I go, look, it's just annoying me, these hi-hats are out over here. It's unnatural for me because the drummer is in the center of the stage. I might narrow him down a little bit. So now the hi-hats are sort of off to one side without being over there. Really, really useful thing. Again, if you need to get more complex than that, then the gain tool that I just had up gives you lots of different options for managing that. That's your main stuff there that's within the channel. So you've got your input. So your input is your gain. And I'm amazed that virtually no DAW has a gain on the top, even those that emulate something vaguely resembling a mixer, which is invariably just the matrix for their VST things. Virtually none of them have a gain slot. They make you insert your own gain device, and it's like, come on, guys. Now, the last thing that we've got is our master's strip. Our master's strip is similar, but different. We'll open the whole lot up because not everything's used in the same place. On the masters, this is what's coming up to here, as in the mix. It's what you hear. it first gives you the option of going through this Sound Goodifier SSL compressor. I have read a few times that this is apparently a very, very good emulation of that process. It doesn't add any saturation, but apparently the ballistics, as in the timings and the feel, is very good. I don't know. I use the rack version of this, but I don't use this. There is an issue. This automatically adds some gain in its gain compressor, the makeup gain. I'm not a fan of that. While I fully understand it, it gets used as a sound goodifier because it just suddenly makes things sound loud. When we switch it in, we don't want it to make things sound louder, but people are afraid of like, oh, it's going to make it sound softer. Now, the way that I was trained to set up a compressor is to set things like this. This is stepped. So you brutalize and you go, okay, where's the groove happening? There's quite a nice groove there. In which case, I'll back off. And then back off. You may think that sounds better because it's louder, but you notice it also sounds a little flat. Just like the difference between the grooved MIDI and the not grooved MIDI, we end up with a groovier track. At which point we can say, okay, I'm losing about 4 dB. Flat. Groovy. That's called the glue compressor, and when you get it right, it is a gorgeous process. You've seen me do it fairly quickly because I've been doing it for years. That's the way I compress. I very rarely compress to basically limit things. I see people doing it and I just think, oh God, everything just sounds brutalized and unlively. You see, I've got no compression, but with using the performance of a grooven set of players and no mix, suddenly this sounds pretty good. So this alone is a great device. There is a racked version of this, so you can take that exact process and just put it anywhere in the rack, on an instrument or on a mix. It will tend to work better on a mix or a sub-mix thereof. I just don't tend to use it because it's stuck over here, and I normally have it closed up. But it is a really impressive thing. You can control your sends, but again, I don't really use that, so we can change the level of ascend. So in this case, we have our reverb. It's good that it's there, because there are technical situations where you might say, look, I want to change the balance of something or other, and this is the best way to do it. You see that it's marked as reverb, because we've also got our returns, which are here. So that's the signal coming back into the desk. That's the signal going out of the desk. But there's not, most of the time, much purpose for you to use that. You've got your master inserts, which is just your, well, oddly enough, inserts on your masters, which is here, which hopefully is doing nothing when you are composing and mixing. I will have a limiter across it because I don't want to send things out that are bad, but if I notice that limiter is doing any work, then I pull my mix back. So the insert here allows you to bypass your masters, which is not always the wisest thing to be doing. I've got everything running because we're in a live situation and I don't want to push stuff out that sounds more terrible than necessary or does what I just did there, made things go splat. Not a good sound. And then we've got our reverb thing. Now I use this a lot because obviously I set up my reverbs here and I only use one. Occasionally I'll use 2 or 3, but they're all balancing together anyway. And then we've got our master control, which is control room. So you see me flipping between master and return 1. So I can just listen to that reverb and go, okay, does this feel like what I'm looking for? Is this the right size? Is this the right depth? kind of thing. And then putting it back into the mix and going, am I winning? I never use this because I've got a knob on my Evo 4 here, which is a lovely big knob with flashing lights. Obviously, make sure that's at 100% if using the well-advised wiring method of having your control room out going to your masters. Because it makes no sense to use your masters out, because then you can't use these features. And because it's digital, then there is absolutely no loss, so long as you've got this fella set to 100%, because digital is digital is digital. A 0 is a 0, a 1's a 1's, a sine wave's a sine wave. Nothing is anything other than what you're hearing. There is the option for plug-in delay compensation. That just will automatically adjust the whole door to keep it in track. Some plugins will use time in nefarious ways. Let's have a look here. Our limiter works in nefarious ways. A 4 millisecond look ahead means that we've now got some time that has been furfied. Some VST furphy time really poorly. So some of them don't report right, but that's the VST's fault, not the host's fault, more often than not. If you want plugin compensation on, then just leave it on. I've just put it on and leave it alone. Personally, I barely care much one way or another, but I don't use much in the way of devices that meddle with time or meddle with much of anything, because I personally feel they do more damage than good. It's like having a great singer. You know, we've got Deborah Harry from Blondie come in, you know, in a heyday, 1979 or something. She's come in to sing a vocal, and then we just mellow tune her into T-Pain submission. And we're just like, what are you doing? You've got somebody who's great, and now you've just made them sound, nothing against T-Pain, but you've made them sound like shite. So I'm not a fan. But seeing there's a broad process and it has no real... But if I do see big numbers, I'm looking and going, who's doing this? Is this a win? Is this necessary? So that's our SSL-styled mixer. It's a big workflow thing, which you will be using whether you really use it or not, because it's the hub through which all our noise comes together. The next thing that we can do is we can add buses. Reason has one kind of bus, basically, because that's all you need. I notice some doors have like 27 different types of busing, because each one's trying to solve the fact that they've got it wrong the first time. If it makes you feel special to have 27 different types of busing, okay, but you only need one kind of bus. It's a bus. So to get busing, we can right-click in here, new output bus. Even cooler, when you're busing, you're generally busing several things together. Bus means put several things on the bus. Quite literally, you just take several people, put them on the bus, and you only need to drive one thing to school. Rather than 47 different children in 47 different cars, you can put 47 children in one bus and handle them at once. So I can highlight several different channels, which can be contiguous or discontiguous. Contiguous meaning shift-click, it'll take all of them. Discontiguous meaning I can choose the ones that I want. In this case, I'm going to create a rhythm bus, a bus for my rhythminess. And I can right-click and route to, or I can click in here, new output bus. It's currently going to the master section. Now I can create a bus, and I will call that RY for rhythm section, and I will automatically color it yellow. I've now got a rhythm bus, meaning that I can solo my drums, or I can solo my drums and bass together. Woohoo! Now this pair of instruments don't work nicely together yet. Now they work nicely together. Here how there's they really work together now. This is mixing. This is feel. You could say, okay, yeah, that kind of works, especially when there's a lot of compression. But natural balance means that I just go... Here how there's that point where they're just really... Now I can control their whole level here with the bus. Obviously got access to my inputs up the top. I'm going to close this down. So if I feel like I've lost some level, I can drive a bit harder. And this is where your dynamics section, if you're going to use it, really comes into play. Yeah, that's really emphasised the rhythm, a little excessively, but cool. That is nice. See, we've got a reverb send here. We want to get rid of that. We want the reverb send to be here. Now, while these buses behave perfectly, as in when I change the level here, it's effectively changing the level of these, it's changing the level of everything very sensibly. We're about to do some processing, so we only want to hear reverb from the bust signal. Remember, we're treating all those children as one object. So we're now treating our drums and bass as one object. And now this becomes an insert, so I will set this to insert before my EQ, and I will put something in my insert box. Now I'm going to use a VST because it's my favourite thing for doing this. VST3, I bought one. This one immediately makes things louder again. I'm terrified of the idea of making things quiet, but it's the groove you're looking for. So again, I'm just looking for the groove. Let's go to a nasty ratio and splat the thing. Grooving, that's nice. We probably don't want that much compression happening. Bypass. Glue compression. Exactly what I showed you up there with the SSL box up here, but you notice it kind of seems louder anyway, even though we've technically reduced our overall level. That's good. That's minimum voltage, maximum output, so maximum excitement. And something grooves and funks, it can be quieter and still more grabby. So our bus now means that when we're sending our reverb from here, as opposed to from the instruments, the reverb is hearing that compressed grooved signal. Which sounds much better. Otherwise you get what's called delamination, as in the sound that's gone to the reverb is not the same sound as the listener is hearing, therefore it's hard for their brains to put them back together. There are very few situations in which you want to do that delamination thing. If you push the level here, which actually I had done, then it will push what's going in here. If you feel that there's not enough, I will kind of virtually never allow my faders to go above. If I felt that that was not enough, I'm either going to use the output level tool here, or I will put in that gain tool. So here, if I felt like, oh, okay, I've lost too much level in my compressor, what have you, then I'll push it here. The great thing is you can then do stuff like saturation on your buses. So if I were to grab tape, we'll pull these levels back to, they're not going to be like El Splatsvillo. So we've now got that little bit of saturation. I might even decide put a little bit of tubey excitement. Whatever I want to do can be done on the bus, and that way it's pulling everything together. Even EQ that's done here will pull these separate things, those separate children that put on the school bus. It's like putting them in uniform. You're making them as one, which is what mixing's about. It's about taking all the 47 children playing their orchestra instruments and turning them into one song, which is a single identifiable object. Next thing that Reason does very, very nicely is parallel channels. Now, if I want an extra channel, let's say I decide that snare drum, I want to mix that different like. So I'll find my snare here. I'll send that at an output, so 3, 4. I'm going to add another mix channel. Don't want that to be wired to anything. It wouldn't be automatically anyway. 3, 4 input here. So now, going back to my mixer, we've just got snariness. Now I'm automatically going to color that. Drums 3, 4, well, that's a little silly. That's a snare. I'm also going to want to send this to the rhythm bus, otherwise we delaminate that sound, don't we? Might want to do something with that. So now I can take this and I can create a parallel channel. In this case, the parallel channel's already going to rhythm as well. Parallel channels, you hear how it suddenly made it louder. Parallel channels must not be used as a sound loudifier. I'm amazed the number of times I've been sent mixes where there are like 14 tracks, not quite that many, but like 3 or 4 tracks of drums, bass, snare. They're exactly the same. They've just done this like, oh, if I put 2 channels in, then it's twice as loud. It's like, dude, this is what your level control's for, and you shouldn't be doing this. There is no sense in this. What we can do with our parallel channel is that we can say, okay, I now want to process each of these a little differently. So we see we've got snare and parallel 1 snare. So if I'm just listening to my snare and I say, look, I want to do something. Let's say I want to make it more stereo. I can say, okay, I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to, let's put a little bit of EQ on him. Let's just pick so I'm going to bring out the low end of that snare, or the body of that snare, and I'm going to put a little bit of okay, so that's one side. I'll move him over there, turn him off, go to this guy here, and do something similar. You don't want to do radically different things because then you can find them hard to balance. So I can say, okay, this one I want to bring out the cut. Okay, that's nice. That's a fair bit of snap there. Now, I might well decide that I'm going to roll off. In which case, with this guy, I might decide we're going to roll off some of the high end here. So individually, they both sound like poop. Put the pair of them into solo. I've now got a slightly distressingly stereo snare. Let's put in an echo. What do I have there? 48. I'm going to need a little bit longer. And we've got a stereo snare. We can see that they have become different levels. Now I'm going to take these and I'm going to do something to bring them together, because at the moment they are not very well together. So I'm going to route to, remember this is another way of doing it, and we will go SN for snare. Again, I'm going to make it yellow, so that tells me that it's a bus, and that's going to my rhythm section. So now, rather than listening to those, I'm listening to the two of them together. Here's my snare bus. This is overkill for what we're doing here, but hopefully you'll get the idea. And then I'm going to put in another echo. Lovely. I can take this snare, put it back in. But I want to do something to pull it together again, and I'm just going to go to this guy because I know it's likely to give me the results that I'm looking for. I'm happy for the extra level that's coming in here. Hear how I get that explosive 80s gothy sort of sound. So with the fairly fast attack, and then it's releasing, which is letting that echo just rise. Now I'm sending far too much of my drum mix probably to the reverb, so I can pull that back a little bit there. And so that's shown us several things. We've got the ability to create parallel channels and buses, as well as creating extra channels if necessary for routing stuff like a drum section that I want to have go somewhere else. Now I can fold that up, seeing I don't need any more. I'll leave these open because they are mix features. So you see the instruments are closed down because I don't need to work on them. They're written, you know, John Bonham's been and gone and he's off at the pub. It's now time for Alan to do his work for me. And therefore I can see what is important to look at. This guy's not doing anything, so I'm going to get rid of him. Silly to keep things around that aren't doing anything. Now, EQ we're going to look at. The SSL EQ is wonderful, but as I said, it's really designed for mixing. Therefore, when I've got an instrument that needs some work, let's say this guy, I would be working on this in the instrument level. I've obviously done some work. Let's say I really wanted to be more aggressive. Then that's where I would be grabbing the equalizer and being aggressive here. I might actually want to so I'll do aggressive work here and then subtle work when I'm mixing. So I bring up my F2 I don't want it to interfere with the bass. And you see, these are really broad curves by nature. Or you can put them in E mode, in which case they become surgical. And while it's possible here I've made moves that kind of contradict each other, remember EQ is made from phase shifting, which is wonderful. And I've made whole videos on that. And the phase shiftiness that comes from EQ, especially if you subtly move them with LFOs, which is super easy to do here in Reason, especially if you've got the right device. In-class probably isn't the best device for that because it locked. But we could always take this guy and automate him. Then we end up with movement that we didn't have before. Flat, moving. Oh, one thing with the EQ here is that it's not an equal level. When you pan hard right or hard left, it goes up by about 3 dB. So if you notice, well, that's getting a bit loud, you might want to pull back on your levels slightly. I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, just showing you that I will do aggressive tone controlling here at the instrument before it hits the desk, and then I will do making it fit nicely in the mix with this window. Now this window is wonderful. I'm leaving my F2 window open. I go over to my drums, my snare, let's say my snare here. Now there's a lot of bass on that we don't need. Let's get rid of that. There's not really any joy in that, but just little tiny tweaks in this case means that we end up with really great results. Here, obviously, you see I'm not doing this in solo that much. Bass. There's no purpose to all of that flub down there. Very tempting to do this, but remember, we're pushing that into an EQ, so there's no sense in that. Let's put it into E mode. Or even use this in the bell mode. See if there's a point at which we can and then again over here. I'm going to find a point at which it punches nicely and put a very, very small move in here. If I want to clear out some space, might be a bit thick there. While tempting to have the brightest hi-hats ever, they're going to become a problem for the rest of the mix. It's not the lead hi-hat show. See, so little subtle movements here are making things work nicely. This has a lot of low end, but it's probably not serving any purpose. So a certain amount of it I can cut away. Cool. And then our pad. You see, all these moves I'm making are very, very tiny. If I feel like I need bigger moves, and I've already set that up at the instrument level, then I would be doing that at the instrument. This one is a bit of a tricky one, this fella, because it's a bit... So we might consider using some kind of leveling. Now I'm going to give this guy a go. This sort of stuff is actually relatively hard to level. Obviously we've got stuff coming up here that serves no purpose. We've added like a whole pile of level, which is Unfortunate. I think we want to move fairly quickly and yet fairly slowly. So we're using this just to kind of level that sound, so it's a little less suddenly really loud and squeaky and suddenly not there. If we find particular frequencies that are annoying to the mix, not annoying to my ears personally, but annoying to the mix, this is one of those ones where I reckon I want that to move around in the mix. It doesn't have much presence, shall we say. So that's where I can use these features, and I can add in a utility, the pulsar, which you see me use over and over. I can drag that to pan. I can close that back up again. Here. Helicoptering. Now the last thing I want is that to be tempo synced, because that's just lazy and the brain will turn it off. I just want to find a point at which it sits nicely. So this is a little like Leslie. And then I want to find out how much do I need to make the mix sound nice. Remember, I've got to pull a couple of dB off, because as it goes off to the left or right, it actually goes up in level. But by moving it, we're making it more noticeable, meaning we can pull the level down. Now that we've got a mix that works, we can look at moving across to mastering. As I say, I would not normally have any of this stuff going, but I do because I don't want it to blow levels. So I've turned them off for the moment, while still leaving our limiter on. I commonly bring a mix up and it can be as low as minus 12 dB full scale, so full peak meters. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's digital, it doesn't really matter. I can boost that if I need to. First thing I'm going to do is compression. Now this is the same as what you saw me do with Master Bus Compressor. We can use this Master Bus Compressor generally with this method you don't want more than about 4 dB of compression. Makeup, yeah, see again that's still set to +5, which annoys the bejesus out of me. I wish that was not set that way. But things being what they are, compressors will tend to have makeup gain there already, which is so wrong. So you can use that device or use this device. This is a broader, not so used option A, B, C or D. Set that to nothing, set that to nothing, set that to nothing. Nothing here is still 50 milliseconds. And set that to really brutal. Technically anything above 4 to 1 is considered limiting, but nonetheless. And there's a point that that's the overall groove that we're getting out of this piece. Pull that up here and pull we can go really low ratios here. But if you want to feel that groove, you might want to keep it higher. Just don't overdo it. It's very easy to overdo it at this point. You've also got the soft knee. A hard knee means that when it hits that threshold level, it just automatically starts doing 4:1. Soft knee means that there's a transition point. On the low end of the transition point, it's doing 1:1. On the high end of the transition point, it's doing 4:1. In between, it's beveling across that. With this device, you can actually end up with more compression when you turn this on because of where the bevel's set to happen. Sometimes it's set to hit 4:1 at the threshold point. Sometimes it's set to hit above the threshold. This, I think, is set at. So whatever it's done, its feeling is you've got to work it by feel. Not by ear, but by feel. So it's really up to you as to which you feel works better. If you feel like you've lost some level, you can put it back here. I never do. I never use adaptive release. Yes, you can bring in side chains and what have you. I don't know why you would do that on the masters, but whatever. Now, compression versus EQ. This is where I say EQ makes sense to do afterwards. This guy's got an automatic low cut at 30. It's largely what you're going to want to do anyway. To be honest, I don't use this device for this feature, but there is nothing wrong with it. I just use something that's more suited and got a little bit more finesse to it, but there's nothing wrong with this device at all. Shelf, I don't really want, so it leaves me 2 points at this point, well 3 at this point. So one is I'm probably going to try to find where does this feel too tubby. A mix commonly feels tubby at a certain point. All I'm doing is looking for the point. And you should know what you're looking for. You should be able to feel like, oh, there's a little bit of something or other. I can feel that there. And then the other way is just to... Okay, fair enough. And then, but again, you want a really tiny amount, which it's often easier to do with other devices than this, but this was made to do multiple duty, and it does do its job well. But you're going to want broader. 5 or 6 is common, you're getting up into the air frequency, and then maybe at 8 to 10. Again, I'm in headphones, so this might sound like poop. Flat. Exciting. It is not uncommon to add some kind of saturation, tape kind of stuff. So we'll put in a scream, which is going to sound terrible. So before I even play it for you, I will set it to 16 and 110 for tape. Give you a really nice thing. I don't use the compression on that. You can change the overall tone here. I don't actually use that, because normally I'll have it here and then that EQ, which you can now feel is just a little too... But out of headphones, it may well sound a lot nicer. So I'll let it feel just a little. Yeah, how it just lifts everything. Now, the final leveling. We've got a limiter here, which as you see is not doing anything. Great. We could push our levels here until it's doing stuff. Let's get rid of this mixer. Don't want to see it, because I want to be able to see my big meter. That's peak. My VU is sitting at 0, which is minus 12 on peak. So you could say that's all right. The problem is, it's really hard to bypass and check if what you're doing there is okay. So a smarter method will be to bring in a gain tool. If you've got Reason 13, you've got gain tool. If you don't have Reason 13 and for some bizarre reason you are not going to get it, there are a couple of options. There's Forgotten Clank's Omega Trimmer, but honestly far better, even though it's a few dollars, is the Selig Gain. I actually really like the Selig Gain because when you close it up, you've still got all the features that you need. So we can push our levels here. Not only see what's happening, Now you'll notice my limiter. There are a couple of ways of using the limiter. You don't even have to use the limiter. Soft clipper will do the real magic for you, far better than the limiter. Don't push things heavily into a limiter. It's a bad call, but you can put it into fast, and I'm not going to turn soft clip off. And then auto and what have you, but honestly, it sounds kind of horrid to me, but I don't like things that are over smushed. The look ahead gives it 4 milliseconds of looking into the future, going, oh, we're about to go over, because I've already seen the future, and so it starts to limit and process in advance. Again, I don't like that kind of stuff. So I will work with a mid or a slow, depending upon the thing for the limiter. The aim being to have the limiter do very little. Most of the peaky peaks are being caught in this soft clipper. The soft clipper just, well, it hacks them off. If you put it to clip softness as 0, then it's a hard clipper. It's just going, you shall not pass. And there are some reasons to want to do that, but it can get a bit distorty pretty quick. Soft clipper means that it's munging that turnover point, and you get a nice kind of a brightness from it. A really forward, nice brightness from it. I think the half and half of 50% of whatever their values are is great, and then a slower thing here, so your clipper is catching the real peaky peaks, the pointy stuff, which is relatively irrelevant, just messing up your levels, because the body of it is likely to make the clipper distort, but the little short transients will distort very nicely in a positive sense. You see my limiter is really doing much more than this, because my levels are already at 0 VU. Everything sounds too loud in headphones, so I might push that a little differently out of headphones. This isn't about whether this sounds good, just understanding how you do it. Now, the advantage of doing it this way means that I can bypass settings, which I'm going to be very careful of doing here because I'm likely to blow my levels. So you'll see I have another gain tool here. And this is set to, because this doesn't have an ultimate output level, yes, you can output gain here, but this just changes what's going into the soft clipper. If you're not using the soft clipper, then this is the thing. You would set that to -3 and you'd be great. But I'm using the soft clipper because the soft clipper is fabulous. And yes, I will always put my clipper after my limiter, not the other way around, because it makes no sense to me. But other people swear that way, and they're welcome to this. So this is set to -0.3 of a dB. If you want to be super, super anal, you can go to a whole dB down, but you shouldn't need it. All right, that's a fairly long one, 1.5 hours, but that's to be expected with this because we had a lot of ground to cover. But really all I'm trying to show you is that there's an awful lot that you can do with Reason. You're not locked to one method. I absolutely adore this, that whatever I click on in terms of my mixer, let's get my mixer back. Whatever I click on here, it will focus on my EQ for that. No other DAW has this feature. There are some VST that try to give you this feature, but that's got to be a pain in the ass. You've still got to open the VST and what have you. This, just having F2, there's the window that's there. This sits in my middle monitor with the F2 window open all the time when I'm mixing. It's not mixing with my eyes, it's just giving me a sense of what's going on, and it's so easy to mix with this. It's so unencumbered with, well, shite. Yes, you could put gradients and this, that, and the other all over it, but it'd just make it a pain in the ass to use. This is designed as a mixing EQ, so at this point where I'm just creating balance, because that's all mixing is just balance. I'm just creating balance with the elements to have them come together as one. This is the best EQ ever. And if I want to be more aggressive, and I use this for mastering. There's my punch. because I got more punch, I can have less bottom end. Because it's pulling through. That beginning causes us to follow the oomph, so we don't need to add like to go loud. We can push through our punch. That's using a VST, which is a freebie and is actually an absolutely beaut device, sounds wonderful. That's it. The next video is actually going to be walking through a real existing piece. It's actually a demo song still, but you get to see all of this come together as, oh, that's a whole within a song, because obviously working through fragments like this is a little different from fully real world. We're going to walk through a real world project.